And you can go there, Greg.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Greg Natterer. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science at Memorial University. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome you tonight virtually to this Speaking of Engineering lecture. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the history and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where we are located and the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. I'm excited to be part of this event tonight with you and to bring this virtual Speaking of Engineering lecture as part of the MUN Alum Days 2021. The Speaking of Engineering lecture series promotes engineering in our province of Newfoundland and Labrador and raises awareness of engineering-related issues among students, the academic community, and the general public, which we feel is very important. I'd like to extend special greetings to our invited speakers this evening. First, Julia Hedersen, who is the project manager of subsea projects at Technip FMC. Secondly, Andy Fisher, the chief product officer at Breathe Suite. And Ed Martin, CEO of Carnegie Learning Zorbits. I'd also like to give some special thanks tonight, in particular, Jackie Locke, our communications officer in the faculty, for organizing this virtual event tonight. And also Paul Martin, who is in the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, and he's going to keep the technical side of our presentations going smoothly tonight. Many thanks to you. I'd also like to acknowledge Janet Bradshaw, who is the CEO and Registrar of the Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Newfoundland and Labrador, or also known as PEGNL. PEGNL is an invaluable asset to our program in the faculty and our graduates, and we're honored to partner with them to bring you this lecture series. I will invite Janet to share a few words with us a little later tonight. So on to the presentation this evening. Tonight's talk is going to be about how the pandemic has transformed the workplace. The abrupt closure of offices and workplaces, as we know, around the world due to the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in major disruption of traditional work methods. Many workers have been required to adapt quickly to this new era of remote work. Some thrived, but others struggled. Numerous companies have transformed their methods of achieving their goals in a virtual environment. During this Speaking of Engineering lecture this evening, a panel of engineering alumni will discuss their personal experiences from the past 18 months and how the field of engineering and their respective workplaces have changed as a result of this pandemic. I'd also like to mention that the talk tonight is part of the MUN Alum Days 2021 that I mentioned earlier, and this is a series of events that are happening this month to help build our connections with our wonderful alumni of the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science. You can find more information about these events at mun.ca and by searching MUN Alum Days 2021. Before we begin, just a couple of logistical details that I'd like to share. We're going to plan to have some time for questions and answers after all of our speakers have spoken. Please use the Q&A feature, which is one of the buttons in the bottom right of your screen. I hope you can see that. And you can type your questions there at any time, and we will go through those at the end of the presentations. If you wish, you can indicate to which speaker your question should be directed. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker this evening, Julia Hedersen. Julia graduated from our program in 2009 with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. She was born in Georgetown, Conception Bay, and moved to St. John's to study engineering after finishing high school. During university, she was vice president external of the Student Society in Engineering and won the Dean's Award for Leadership. Upon completion of her bachelor's degree, Julia went to work in Houston, Texas at FMC Technologies, now Technip FMC, where she's done previous work terms in both Houston and Norway. Julia has been with the company the past 12 years in various roles within the Subsea Group. She's currently a project manager for multiple projects in the Gulf of Mexico and responsible for delivering subsea hardware for both greenfield and brownfield projects. Julia is active in her company's parents network and the Women's Energy Network of Houston. She lives in Katy, Texas with her husband Blake and her son James. It's a pleasure for me to welcome Julia. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you so much, Dean, and to everybody for having me here today. It's truly an honor to be back in the engineering building. I know even virtually, it feels really good to be home. So to present during this lecture series for Mondays after almost 12 years of not doing any sort of presentation in the engineering building, I think my last time was probably doing my final mechanical engineering design presentation, which I don't even want to get into that right now, but it was a memorable experience and I'm sure tonight will be as well. So for the last 13 years, 12, almost 13, I've been working here with Technip FMC in Houston, Texas. Like you said, I started my journey as an engineer working offshore, which this picture here, a much younger, more naive version of myself out on an oil rig. That's where I got my start. I had aspired to do that during my time as an engineering student at Memorial. And I did do the specialization in the offshore oil and gas sector, which really did me well thus far in my career. So with that, today I did want to touch a little bit about what we do at Technip FMC, just to give everybody a feel for our business. And then also, what we're here today to talk about is how that really has evolved during the COVID-19 pandemic. The business journey through this has been tremendous, and there are a ton of learnings that I won't get to go through all of them today, but I hope I'll touch on some of the key ones and my key personal takeaways from the pandemic and what it has provided to me and the business. So with that, Technip FMC, we're an oil and gas service company for both subsea and surface. So we do both the onshore and the offshore piece. So like was mentioned, I've been a part of the subsea portion of the business for my time with the company. We do everything from research, development, engineering, design, manufacturing, procurement, and then the installation piece is back in 2017, FMC Technologies, which I originally hired on with, merged with Technip. And now we are Technip FMC and have the ability to actually install the subsea equipment that we manufacture and design. We also provide the subsea, services and the aftermarket and refurbishment for that. So our main goal is to support our customers, such as operators like ExxonMobil, for example. Technip and FMC were the provider for the Hibernia project. So we work with operators such as ExxonMobil, Shell, for them to reach their needs for offshore. So obviously, during the pandemic, those needs for oil and gas in the world don't stop. And so we had to continue on with our business during a very, turbulent time, and trying to navigate through this was a challenge. We operate in over 40 countries, Canada being one of them. In Newfoundland, we have almost 100 employees locally working on various projects. And in total, we have about 20,000 employees globally. So we're a big operation. And obviously, depending on what part of the world that you're in, we really needed to be sure that we were adhering to the number one thing in all of this, which was safety. So within the company, our core values, just like your personal core values get you through tough times, the core values of our company, which were defined well before the pandemic, really helped guide us through the unknown. Safety has always been a foundational belief of our company, and it has been a major focus in the oil and gas industry. I think the oil and gas industry has paved the way for a lot of other industries on best practice. And when the pandemic hit, we knew we had to do something immediate, first of all, to keep our people safe, and also to ensure that we kept the community safe in which we live and work. So we instituted immediately an incident management team. So what that was working with our local sites. We had about 31 different incident management teams throughout the globe. And with that, about 400 employees became a part of that team with multidisciplinary backgrounds, to be sure that we were monitoring, everything that was going on locally, federally, and then of course globally, to ensure that our employees were safe when it comes to travel. Being on the project management side of things, just as an example, I manage about 4 or 5 different manufacturing sites for my project to get all of the equipment that we need for a specific development. And with that, oftentimes involved travel to different locations, one for meeting people, another for seeing the project, from start to finish, making sure things were getting done. Well, all of that changed, right? And we had to think a little bit differently about how we approach travel. We had to be sure that, we weren't in close contact with each other, even though, as I mentioned before, we still had to continue with our manufacturing. We're a manufacturing facility, so we were considered essential workers when it came to manufacturing of our equipment in the oil field. And also, when it comes to installing that equipment offshore, our offshore technicians were oftentimes having to work, and so we had to manage that and keep them as safe as possible. So how did we adapt to COVID-19? I want to talk about 3 main areas in which we work and how we adapted. So of course, in a company like ours, we do a significant amount of technology development, which is, the design and engineering of a lot of our products. And then, the figuring out the best ways to install equipment, which oftentimes in the past, the best ways of doing that was getting teams together, just like we did, back in engineering school. Everybody gets in a room, we draw things out, we use whiteboards, we talk through things. Well, we had to rethink how we accomplish some of these goals, to eliminate as much as we could being in contact with one another, due to the spread of the COVID-19 virus, and at the beginning with the uncertainty of that. Pre-vaccine and all of that. And so, just like everybody, just like we're doing tonight, one of the main things was to do the virtual meetings. We did Teams. We have an internal communication group where we share best practices, and we used a lot of digital tools in that space. We also developed a proprietary Subsea Studio, it's called. It's a software which we can use to exchange data efficiently with our suppliers and with our customers, where they can actually upload CAD drawings and proprietary information that previously, was kind of not really considered to be able to be done by a service provider. But we took it upon ourselves to, go through all the legal that we needed to be able to share that type of information with the operators and our suppliers to put it into a model, so that we could work through some of the field architecture of our designs ahead of needing those offshore. And then when it came to procurement and manufacturing, this is really the realm that I'm working in now, is we had to really, adjust to some of the supply chain challenges that we've been having. So just like in many other industries, there's a lot of supply chain constraints right now. So with existing contracts we had in place, I mean, we had, hundreds of different projects going on throughout the world, and the pandemic hit right in the middle of a lot of those, where we had existing obligations to our customers, which some of those were affected by COVID-19. And so we had to work with our supply chain. We had to work with operators. There were force majeure letters that had to be sent out, to make sure that everybody understood the magnitude of COVID-19 and how that affects our business as a supplier to many major oil and gas industries, or companies rather. And then ultimately the install and offshore piece is what we all work towards in our companies, to get that equipment ready to be installed subsea for the operator. And then, getting technicians offshore and things like that. It was challenging because, a lot of them had to quarantine for longer periods of time away from their family. And I know that this is first nature to the province as well, traveling outside for work at times and then having to quarantine when you get back home. So that was real here as well, to have to adjust to that and navigate through that work-life balance and make sure to keep our people safe, but also keep them happy, right? Because it's important to be able to be with your family during a difficult time, such as a pandemic, but you also have to work. So there was some balance there and some considerations being put into place to make sure that employees were taken care of. So just a cheat sheet, I like to call it, that I put together to kind of give an overview of increased flexibility that we've seen as far as our workplace environment. So when I started working 12, 13 years ago, like, it was unheard of not to go into the office every day. You just would never ask. Like, I felt that it was, it was just the way things were, and that was understood. But as time went on, and especially in other industries outside of oil and gas, there was definitely a shift towards more flexible work programs. And I think we lagged a little bit behind in that regard. And I think it had a lot to do with the nature of our business and the fact that we're a 24/7 operation and need to support offshore operations at all times. But in 2017, we did adopt, outside of the pandemic, obviously that was before the pandemic, we adopted a 980 program, which was like a step in the right direction of a little bit more flexibility, where you could work 80 hours over a 2-week period, and then it ended up being every other Friday off. So that was kind of nice. But then with the pandemic, the huge disruption that brought, we all started working from home in March of 2020. And then it really wasn't until June of this year that we started repopulating. And now our new program is that we work 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. So that's a huge shift for our company. But it was really evident during the time that people were working from home that the productivity of our employees was consistent, if not better, than when we were working in the office. And it was recognized by our management. And so we've gradually started repopulating, and we have seen, though, the benefits of having those couple of days in the office, because it is an essential part of building culture and being able to work with your team, meet people that you may not have met before. So those 2 days in the office, for me personally, I feel like it has provided that balance of being able to have a flexible work program and a good work-life balance. So with the flexible work program, though, it's not all positive at the beginning. There were some adjustment times. I think a lot of people, and I know in my position, being the manager of a multidisciplinary team, globally, a lot of the feedback was that people were getting burned out. They were starting the day earlier. They were staying at their desk later. There were lunchtime meetings. And so in an effort to manage this fatigue that, one would call, like, that people have been calling it Zoom fatigue, or, just the lack of moving from one room to another to go to a meeting, we've really been pushing to our teams, if this is going to be sustainable, there needs to be some principles that we can use to respect the work-life balance and respect one another in this environment. So, core principle is around safety and respect, and just a couple of the key points here that I have on the screen is, be considerate of when we're scheduling meetings. Don't do it outside of working hours. We don't have that commute anymore, which is a big deal here in Houston, not to have that. So that's awesome. But don't schedule a meeting at 5 o'clock because somebody's not driving home. So we're just trying to get people used to the fact that work-life balance doesn't mean that you're working longer hours. It really should be a flexible work program that allows you to be able to work your 8 hours at the times that make sense for you to be working. And then lastly, there has been a big push and a focus on well-being. I think that that is something that oftentimes was overlooked. And October being Mental Health Awareness Month, we've put a lot of focus on this at our company, where we've got programs, we've got ways of people to connect to therapy, balancing work life. There's a workplace options slide that I'm showing here that is basically a portal where you can access different things that can help you to have a better work-life balance, how to manage parenting while you're working from home, how you can thrive in such an environment, whether it's to, have access to virtual courses. All of this is provided by the company, and it's just to help to keep people engaged, help to retain talent, because we have to offer these type of things to attract talent in this environment. And it's also really, if it's a happier employee, they're going to do better work. And that's really what the focus is about, having a happy workforce that is engaged in what we do. And just to bring it personally, my personal experience, the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely been isolating in ways, but very rewarding in others. I became a mother during the pandemic. I have a son and now James, and it's actually been good for me. So I was able to spend more time at home. I'm able to spend those extra minutes in the morning, the extra time in the evening without that commute. I've made a conscious effort to connect with old friends. The bottom right hand is actually 5 of my mechanical engineering team. I think we let one electrical engineer in on the group chat, but mostly mechanical. No, just kidding. But we've been connecting with one another, and I think that you find ways to stay motivated during the pandemic, and staying in touch with friends, whether it's virtual or in person. Our company's been putting together a lot of safe events lately, which, go from everything from a global yoga event, which is actually happening tomorrow that I'm looking forward to, an outdoor barbecue, to get colleagues together and just kind of bring people back together when it's safe and appropriate. So that was all that I had to share. I'm looking forward to hearing from Ed and Andy, and looking forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Julia. Really interesting talk, and I was particularly interested in the piece about the a few days at work in person in the office, a few days at home, and seeing that has the productivity and efficiency has stayed up with that. So that's great. Thank you for your
Yes,
presentation.
you're
I'd like
welcome.
to move forward and introduce our next speaker, Andy Fisher. So Andy hardly needs any introduction. For those of us in the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, he's so well known and respected by all of us in the faculty. But just for the formality's sake, I'll go through a regular introduction that I give to speakers here. Andy graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Queen's University and a Master's in Engineering from McMaster University. He joined Memorial's Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science in 1996 and established a Manufacturing Technology Center as a way of enhancing interaction with industry. He left Memorial in 2000 to join Garrison Guitars as a plant manager and chief technology officer during its startup phase. And in late 2004, he rejoined Memorial's Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science and became the first director of industrial outreach. Andy was Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies from 2009 to 2019. And during that period, he led our programs through a new accreditation process, which is an outcomes-based graduate attributes type of process that has been adopted successfully by departments and the faculty. So he also in 2020, well, after all of these many contributions to the faculty, he left in 2020 and became Chief Product Officer for Breathe Suite Inc., Newfoundland and Labrador medtech startup company. So Andy, besides being a really gifted academic, is also a serial entrepreneur. So that's Andy, and he continues to support local companies with product and process development. And he's an advisor and a mentor to many startup companies in the province. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome you, Andy, and we'll turn it over to you now.
Great. Thanks very much, Greg. Appreciate that. And hopefully that was part of my 10 minutes, because I think what Julia said sort of covers a lot of the ground that I have. I think when Julia started, she mentioned that it's been a long time since she made a presentation in the engineering building. For me, it's the opposite. I am always making presentations in the engineering building. So I thought today I would not give you a PowerPoint. I'm going to stare at you. I'm not sure how many of you can see me, but I'm assuming that you can, and talk through. I listed out a few points. I'm also going to mention maybe that Ed's company is doing some amazing things, but he's largely in the software business, and so are we in a way. And so there's a number of things that I'm anticipating that Ed's going to talk about. I heard him on the radio this morning. He said he's going to talk about these things. So I'm going to try to leave some of that ground uncovered as well. And so I'm going to give you just a set of things that puzzle me, that we are challenged with in the company that I'm in, the things that I think about, and hopefully spur a few questions, because I think that's the way that we're going to get the most out of any of these things. I think most people know that teaching is an interactive process, right? We're not trying to fill you up with wonderful knowledge. We're trying to get you to think about some of the things that are going on, and maybe offer information to us as well. So I guess there's one other thing. I did really like the fact, I think Jackie, somewhere in some of the papers about this, she talked about this being young engineers out in the workforce. So I will perhaps give credit to Brett Lokey, who's our CEO. He did just graduate in 2019, and so he's leading this company that I'm joined. But I'm here as a much older stand-in for Brett, who's done at a conference. So Breathe Suite is a startup company. It really did start only a couple of years ago. We're in the medical technology sector, and it's pretty easy to describe our device. And I'm going to assume if some of you have your screens on that you'll be able to see the device that I'm holding in front of myself. So this is a standard inhaler, and this is the device that we've fabricated to go on top. Obviously, it's got electronics in there. And the issue for COPD and asthma patients is that the medications are very, very good, but people are not taking them well. And so the wellness that we're trying to get at is they're either not adhering to their prescriptions or they're not using their prescribed inhalers correctly. And so we measure adherence. When did they take it? How often they take it? And we also measure technique values like orientation and when did they press the button compared to when they started to breathe in, and how long were they breathing in, and did they shake it? So all of these become objective values that a healthcare professional or the patient themselves can use to manage their disease. So as a startup company, we rally around one mission statement, and I think it's super important to kind of bring that up in the context of thinking about all of this, because it's why people work for a company. And for us, ours is about empowering people, and we like to think of them just as people that, like you and I, with asthma or COPD. So we like to empower them to live healthier and longer lives. And that is what everything that we do circles around. And so we're always sort of, as we're meeting and as we're thinking how are we going to do anything, we're always thinking at the bottom of the line, is that what we're doing with whatever the activity is that we're doing. So as a startup company, when I joined, there were 6 people. That's not that long ago, as most of you got if you got the timeline that Greg gave out. We're now up to 25 people, and that is, likely to double again. And that is how startups are going, and I think Ed can speak to that. There was an announcement from CoLab today. They just raised another round of funding, 17 million, I think was what they talked about. They immediately are hiring 25 more people, and then another 25 to come later. So, kudos to everybody in this sector. But the nature of the workplace and the nature of the HR function and all of these things is quite different in this startup environment than it was in my days at the university. So, what do I think about all of that, and where do we see the challenges? Well, let's dig in a little bit to within Breeze Suite. There are some different contexts, and then I also will come back to the fact that every individual has their own unique context. So within our company, we're doing some manufacturing. Up until fairly recently, we were doing it in-house, and so the way in which we deal with employees who have to, physically build things, and the way that we provide a safe environment for them would be different than the way we would for people who are writing software and coding and doing things like that. The first thing to think about in some of these contexts is the regulations, and I'm sure everybody would say, well, we follow whatever rules the government puts out for us, but that's kind of a minimum barrier to entry to operate. You need to provide a safe workplace according to whatever the context of your region is. But everybody who's reading the papers or seeing the news is knowing that those regulations are different every place you are. And like many startups, we have employees in various different places. So we have a couple in California, a couple of Ontario, a couple here, and a couple of different places within the province. And all of those contexts may be quite different, even around the regulations that those individuals have to work within. So that's not to give you any answers about that. That's just a reminder that all of those are context setting for as we're thinking about how do we deal with things. The other thing I will say about manufacturing and COVID is that it has wreaked havoc on supply chains. So if some of you were trying to buy a 2x4, you might know that it drove the prices sky high. But for electronic pieces, and probably both of my colleagues can nod their heads to this one, but it is just crazy. So we're building these devices. There's at least one component on there that has a lead time of over a year. And so talk about different things to balance and different ways to try to get around things. So that's the way that COVID has impacted our workplace and the way that we do things and how much energy we have to put in supply chain management. On the design and development front, I would like to say that, like everyone else, we did go through that rapid period of pushing everybody out and being online. And that was super healthy. It kind of broke all the norms that there were about how do we do things. And some of the others, and maybe there'll be some questions about this, but when everybody's online, there's a whole new protocol of how do we interact with each other, even who's in charge at a meeting. There tends to be more of a democratic approach. You have the speaking role, and then you don't. So it was very interesting to see as we all went online. But of course, like Julia described, you come through that, and then there's the question, well, how do we want to operate as we go forward into the future? I'll jump to the end of that story. Our story is very similar to Julia's, is that we do not, in our case at least, we do not force anyone to be either completely in the office or completely online. We encourage that combination of both. And for those employees who have 3 days or more in the office each week, they have a specific desk. And for those that are less than 3 days in the office, they use one of the hot seats. And I think, Julie, you mentioned, I'm not sure if you talked about it much, but the impact on real estate and other things. So we also noticed that we had to shift where we work because we didn't fit before. And we, again, a very microcosm of what's happening in real estate, but we shifted much later in time than we would have had to if we were all having to locate in the office. In our business, you have to do clinical trials to validate that this is going to be safe to operate. And we also do human factors testing to determine how well people interact with things. And in a COVID environment, very few people, patients and practitioners, are comfortable doing that in a person-to-person way. So we had to come up with some new ways of doing clinical trials, new ways of doing human factors testing. All of these involve some interesting technologies. I think everybody's familiar with how Zoom has blossomed in these times, along with all of the other interface tools. But we found some new tools which allowed us to monitor what a patient was doing with our device. Sort of we could be in the room without being in the room with them. So there's some interesting things that we learned around that. And of course, there were some real advantages and some real challenges, even to making a patient comfortable in that kind of environment. Speaking of rooms, one of the things that we found is that the technology with which you support that combined environment, some people in the office and some people online, matters. So we thought, oh, we've got a boardroom, we've got a webcam, we can do this. What we found is that if you do not provide a very, very good environment for your online participants, it is not fair. It's unequitable. And so that was something that we're still thinking about a little bit, to try to make sure that you're able to participate, that you don't need to be there in order to be heard in the same way, that you're valued in the same way as everyone else. It's much easier for somebody to kind of make a little noise across the table and be heard, for instance. So we're still investing in some of the setups. Another local startup, Avalon Holographics, I can't wait until they get their setup going and we can start to add some of these things in our boardrooms as well. I'm gonna maybe just shift to another challenge that we found, and that is that normally when people are meeting regularly, project management takes on a certain cadence. And what we found in our company is that for everything except for software, and I think Ed will probably again talk a bit more about software, that cadence had a fairly long cycle. We could do some planning, we could say this is what we're going to do, and then we would go ahead and execute on that. And the minute that people are not in the office and we're not communicating regularly and bumping into each other, we changed that cadence. So we moved everyone, engineers, non-engineers, salespeople, everyone in to that rapid agile planning cycle where we have regular stand-up meetings. We set 2-week sprints goals for everything that we do. And we're not going back. So even though people are back in the office, it was kind of an inflection point where we really figured out that what works really well in the software world to allow a company to pivot and move and make priority changes frequently, but not every day, works really well in all of the other endeavors that we're doing. So that was, I think, a learning that came to us because COVID forced us to say, well, how are we going to manage everybody when we're not in the room with each other? I feel like through all of this, because we were so concerned about how everyone was feeling, I think Ed, in your talk this morning, you talked about over communicating. We did that as well. We started to ask everybody kind of how they felt about everything, and we did that almost enough that people say, "Hey, stop already." But in doing that, I come back to a point I mentioned earlier. We got to that idea of individual context. The thing that you bring to decision making is your own context. And so if I happen to be very comfortable in my health state, my immunity, my what's going on locally to me, I might think nothing of a decision. And yet there might be somebody else at that table who is very much concerned about COVID or something else that's going on. And so we found in terms of policy setting, we became much more democratic, much more drafting policies and sharing policies and thinking and talking about policies and their implications and their unintended consequences before we called them policies. And I know it was eye-opening for me. I have learned this lesson many times in my my few years since I'm so young. And this Jackie reminded me that you cannot possibly know what somebody's thinking unless you can get them to engage with you. So we insist on sort of engagement and trying to get everybody to share what that means for them. And so policies around, when you're in, when you're out, implications for scheduling meetings, all of those things. Julie, I think, shared a list of things. All of those things are things that we discussed, and we will continue to discuss as things evolve. Another concept that I just wanted to put out there as part of this was the concept of risk. it becomes clear in perhaps I'm hopeful maybe that there's a number of us with a background in risk who kind of think about what that word means. But risks, relative risks, are quite a different thing than perceptions. And as we think about COVID and the impacts, and all these numbers get shared around, and how does this compare to something else? All of these things are fraught with numbers and very, very challenging to communicate in a way to help somebody make an informed decision. So I think as engineers, we have a particular role to try to share an understanding, a good way of sharing what these levels of risk mean, and sort of responsible ways of reacting to them. So, I kind of have a three-part thing where I talk about risk and perception and policy, and I sort of link those things together, and we make sure that we talk about all of those things until we can sort of get a consensus around where we are. I feel like I'm getting to the end of my 10 minutes with this ramble. There was sort of another specific to Breeze Suite thing that I thought I could bring up here, and that is that many things shifted with COVID. And in the healthcare system, there was a lot of action. And a fair bit of that was around remote patient monitoring. And that is because patients are uncomfortable and practitioners are uncomfortable in face-to-face meetings. And so for devices like ours, which can go home with the patient and provide data to the practitioner, it has opened up a whole world of remote patient monitoring. It's basically what our company is sort of built on, is this idea that we can learn a lot about ourselves and share that data with our healthcare practitioners as we move forward. And the regulatory world has moved much, much faster than it ever would have because of COVID. So there are now fees available to doctors if they look at people's remote patient data. You're seeing more and more things like Fitbits and other things which are providing information that can then be used in a health context. So a myriad of changes that have come on that side of it that have impacted our business. Everything as we move forward is going to be about data. And so there's a lot to learn around how do we manage data, the privacy issues, the security issues around data. And I think COVID just really accelerated that in the healthcare world, sort of fivefold. So I'm gonna pause there. Hopefully I've just thrown out a bunch of things to make you ask some questions and come back to probably Ed and Julia. They seem really intelligent to me, but be happy to answer questions myself too at the end.
Andy, thank you very much. Yes, certainly you've brought forward a lot of points that are certainly very thought-provoking, and just the one that really got me thinking was, among others, just the risk that you were talking about, and the differences between real risk, perception of risk, and how that relates to the numbers that we all hear around COVID-19. So yeah, thank you, Andy. It was very, very nice to hear from you, of course, as always. And I think we will certainly have questions, but we'll leave those, group those at the end, and we'll come back to that. So I would like to move on now to our next presenter, who is Ed Martin. Ed is also a graduate of our mechanical engineering program at Memorial. He has a master's in business administration in addition from Queen's University. Ed is the CEO of Carnegie Learning Zorbits, a company based in St. John's. Carnegie Learning was formerly called Clockwork Fox Studios and is now an EdTech startup that was acquired by Pittsburgh-based Carnegie Learning in April 2021. The company's marquee product, Zorbits Math Adventure, is a teaching and learning platform for children in kindergarten to grade 3 math, and it helps students to develop a deep understanding and a love of math. So, Ed, it's a pleasure to have you join us this evening, and I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Natter. I'm going to share my screen here. I have a few slides. Try to go relatively quickly. I thought Dr. Natter gave a little overview of what our company does. Our platform, Zorbits Math Adventures, for kindergarten to grade 3 kids. Really three main components. One, the series of games for kids that is really engaging for them, but helps them develop this deep conceptual understanding of math. We take all the data that we feed that into what we call an adaptive learning system. So what this adaptive learning system does is adapting the content in every game, both from a math and engagement perspective for every individual student. And it's reporting all of the information back to teachers, so teachers can see how students are doing against all the curriculum objectives. And then we have a recommendations engine in there as well that is recommending specific activities, both in the game and outside, for teachers to create really targeted great lessons. Our goal is just to make math class awesome every day for every kid. Our company is really known for great storytelling and the way we merge that with great pedagogy, great pedagogical practices. And also we are hyper Slack users. Slack is this a chat tool. There's a great feature in Slack called Giphy. So we tend to communicate a lot in GIFs. So I am going to merge these two things. I'm going to tell this in a bit of a story format. I'm going to walk through sort of the 5 phases of the pandemic for our company and what we learned from each of those periods. But there will be GIFs as well, just so you are aware. So phase 1, right from the outset, I call this phase the crushing it phase. And I think we heard, I mean, Andy and Julie talked about this as well. Like when we first started going, we actually noticed productivity go up and we saw happiness go up when it came to work. And of course, our platform is a digital learning platform. It wasn't the worst time in the world to be working on a digital learning platform. In fact, usage on our product went through the roof. We saw massively increased demand for what we were doing. And we did a really good job of supporting teachers during this time. I'm really proud of the work we did at that time. But it was wild. But we persevered, and I think we did exceptional work at that time. And like I said, happiness and productivity were good in phase 1. And we learned a lot of important things. We learned one, it wasn't work from home. We already had a really flexible work from home policy even before this, but people were a little hesitant to use it sometimes. But now that everyone's forced to do it, people really fell in love with it in a lot of ways, like they did across different companies. And I think I mentioned this on the radio this morning. Andy, you mentioned that I mentioned on the radio this morning. Communication was key. We were so conscious about making sure that we were communicating everything because we knew we couldn't just chance overhear something. So we used Slack in particular really, really well. We use another tool called ClickUp, which is a project management software, really, really well. We got everyone using it from marketing all the way through to accounting, product, everyone was on the same platforms. It worked really, really well. So those pieces of technology really helped us. Phase 2, big dip. This is really hard phase. And I don't have a GIF for this because I couldn't find an appropriate one because it was a really, really hard time. And people hit this phase at different times, I think, throughout the pandemic. And we certainly saw both productivity and happiness go down at this stage. It was great up front, and then we sort of hit a bit of a funk. We were still really doing good things, but we saw every couple of weeks I was getting a call from someone saying, "I'm just sad. What can we do?" So we put a lot of focus on mental health during this phase. What was interesting about this phase is that even though people were getting sadder, they still loved working from home. So we polled our staff, our team multiple times throughout the pandemic. And they're still saying, most of them saying, even if the pandemic were over tomorrow, I would still, 71%, I would do 1 day or less a week. 42%, I would just want to work remote forever at this phase. And during this phase, the two things we really learned, getting to that mental openness, honesty, vulnerability are really critical to helping each other. We started adding at the top of meetings, we'd say, the top of a meeting, you'd say, mental health check-in before you start. Tell us if you're happy or not, what's going on. We made it okay for people that, used to calling in sick, we made it okay for people to call in sad. And we made sure that people put their mental health and their families first. We also recognized that this was really good, not just during the pandemic, but we should continue these practices even post-pandemic. Then we sort of reached a little bit of an equilibrium phase. It's a little, still, a little wobbly here and there. But we recognized that we got a little handle of it. Of course, pandemic, things started getting better in Newfoundland. We were allowed to go back into the office again. Some people availed of that right away, some people didn't, and everything in between. But we noticed we started to sort of get a sense of what this was going to look like, maybe even longer term. Although we noticed also that our Newfoundland and Labrador-based employees were doing better at this than those based elsewhere. We have employees in New Brunswick, Ontario, and BC as well. they were in very different pandemic worlds than we were. And so there was an advantage to being in Newfoundland at that stage. So while everyone in Newfoundland, we got together, when socially distanced and did a summer thing. Well, guess what? The people in BC and Ontario were still, in a tough way. But also around this phase, people started saying, might be nice to get back in the office. And when polled them this time, 75% said they wanted regular access to the office, which I thought was really interesting. And we started thinking, initially we're thinking, we'll never need an office again. And now we're thinking, okay, and maybe an office is still going to be a really important part of our future. The big takeaway here, work from home to help people find better balance. And it's something that we need to sort of maintain after this. But especially at the end of 2020, we really focused on process. And I think, Andy, you talked about that as well. It's like, getting the right, I wouldn't call them policies, but norms in place. How to run an effective meeting over Slack. What should and shouldn't be a meeting. Let's not have too many meetings. Let's use Slack to its fullest. The way we do product development, the way we do our stand-ups. We do 2 company-wide stand-ups a week. One a full team meeting, one just a quick check-in at the end of the week. We've kept that going. It's worked really well. So just making sure that we're a really well-oiled machine through everything. Phase 4, I call you did what now? Because we sold our company in the middle of a pandemic. And what was fascinating is I did get to meet the CEO of Carnegie Learning in September of 2019. He came down to Newfoundland, him and the chief product officer. We had a beer and some fish and chips and got to know each other a little bit. But then I didn't see him. I still haven't seen him since. We got our first, we started negotiating sort of in early 2020, 16 months throughout the entire pandemic. This was going on, doing due diligence, and still at no point being able to meet anyone face to face, dealing with their 8 lawyers and 12 accountants, all done virtually. It was hard. So the takeaway from this is just getting acquired in the middle of a pandemic is really weird. It's probably weird even when it's not a pandemic. It's not a particularly common thing. But also, we did develop strong relationships. We wouldn't have done this if we hadn't developed really strong trust relationships, with the executive at Carnegie Learning. And we managed. It takes longer. There's always, when you're negotiating, there's always a little bit of, what are they really thinking? But we really did get there and developed really strong relationships that allowed us to get that over the finish line. Phase 5, that's kind of where we are now. What's next? What are we doing now? And I am not going to prognosticate what the future of work is. I think there's lots of really people who sort of dedicate their lives to this. I can tell you specifically what we're going to do. And number one is, we were already doing, some flexible work before. That's going to be there forever. We're never going to, and I don't think, different things work for different companies. I know some are probably going to say, come in 2 days a week, let's do Tuesdays and Thursdays together. I don't think we're going to do that. We will have moments where we want to bring everyone together, but I think we're going to maintain a high level of flexibility because we know some people really thrive on it. And those who want to come into the office every day, like me, I can do so. Really continue to focus on mental health. I think we just learned a lot about this in general. It doesn't need to be just a pandemic thing. We need to keep it going forever. And processes, especially, and I think Andy made a really good point, when you have a mix of people working in the office versus remote, the people who are remote are always at a disadvantage. So these are the things, how do we have processes and norms to make sure that we are keeping things on an equal playing field? So we think, but we talk about this as often as we talk now about, sort of product itself. We are still fully committed to having a great office though. I think this is really important, and we want the office to be a place where people feel like they can come to get great work done. So we're really focusing on that, but not forcing anyone to do so. We hope they come because the office is going to be great, but not mandating it. We will definitely still be bringing people together. It might be a little more ad hoc. We fly everyone in once a year for a whole team meeting, but I think it's particular for creative work. I think creative work in particular, I think is really best done face-to-face with a physical whiteboard. So where we can, we will be getting our people together to do those types of things as much as possible, even if whether that's like a quick session once a week, or for some other people, maybe it's only once every couple of months, but it's something we want to make part of our culture. And last, I hope maybe I can meet my boss at some point, because I haven't met him since he is my boss, the CEO of Carnegie Learning, and that whole executive team. Not one person from our group has met one person from their group face to face since this all happened, but I think they are coming. A handful of them are going to come up from Pittsburgh in the next couple of months to have an engineering powwow, so that should be good. That is my bit.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ed. Very informative and interesting. I think, so we've concluded with the three panelists and their brief presentations rather. I think I have noticed some questions have come up in the Q&A box, but in general now I'd like to just open it up to members of the audience. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to direct at our panelists or one person in particular, this is the time to do so. We will have some time for hearing your questions, and I'll start it off by going to our first one. And this is a question for you, Julia. Do you think the methods your company implemented during this pandemic will affect the rate of hiring, especially in the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, so I think we're at a point at the moment where we've right-sized our organization to fulfill the commitments to our clients that we have. I would say that hiring will be reflected based on the amount of work that we get in the future. It's not necessarily related to any of the methods such as the flexible work program that we have. I think it'll be more reflective of if we continue to gain work, which we have been successful in. There's a lot of projects out there that we're going after and we're actively winning. We'll be right sizing our business according to the amount of work that we get in-house.
Great, thanks. Okay, we have a question from Dr. Jana Rosales. Some people have observed that there shouldn't be, by the way, before I begin, this is a question not for anyone in particular, all three panelists. Again, some people have observed that there shouldn't be an unreflective return to business as usual in post-pandemic times. Are there things happening in your organizations that demonstrate ways the pandemic has made employers or employees rethink work moving forward? In other words, what changes are your organizations keeping as a result of the pandemic? Great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I didn't see any other mutes come off, so I guess I could take a little stab at it here. I don't know any organizations that are thinking that it'll just be let's go back to business as usual. Like I really don't. My fear might be that some larger organizations, maybe Greg, you could speak to the university, or maybe in some of the biggest healthcare organizations, or insurance perhaps. But I don't even there where I talk to people, I don't see anyone thinking that we had it right before. And I think COVID made it clear that we should continue to experiment until we get it better, and then continue getting it better. I do think that again, all the companies that I'm working with, they are very much more explicit about the culture they're trying to develop. I think before it was kind of an understanding that we have a culture, but the minute nobody's in the office, you have to be much more, what kind of culture do we want to have? How are we going to engender that? What are we doing? So, the events that you do to try to make sure that everybody in the organization, remote and not remote, are part of that culture and feel that way. Hiring for culture, all of these things I think will never change. And I do think, at least in our company, it has helped us in our discussions around inclusivity and equity. But anyway, I'll stop there. I think Julia or Ed?
No, I just wanted to add that, work from home, flexible work program is here to stay. And I think that's been one of the biggest catalysts that COVID has been for the oil and gas industry in general. I know a lot of companies similar to ours are adopting this, and it's helping to retain people and attract people to our field.
Yeah, I mean, coming from the software space, I think software is the area that's across the board. Amazon, Google, everyone's announcing that they're going to keep these flexible work practices. So I think that's going to happen pretty pervasively, certainly in our types of spaces. I really hope the mental health thing does continue as well. I think they really shone a light on that, and it's easy. That's an easy one for people to kind of forget about, and I really hope that stays at the forefront. As a company that develops software for students, this is somewhat related, but we were supporting a lot of students and teachers through the pandemic, trying to do virtual learning. This is less workplace, but I think there was a broad chasm in terms of student experiences trying to learn through the period, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and a broad difference in socioeconomic backgrounds. So it shone a real light on that piece. I think in education and then further across the edtech industry, and I hope that continues long past the pandemic as well.
Very interesting. If I may just follow up, since we're on the topic and you're speaking education, Ed. So as you know, that's the sort of the sector that we're in here at the university. And I would say in general across Canada, universities have moved back to in-person instruction, and recognizing that there is that intrinsic value of the interaction, students having with an instructor in the classroom. So are you finding the same, like just the nature of education itself and the value of the in-person interaction that, just although virtual has many great, I guess, values and opportunities and things that we can do that we otherwise couldn't, there is still something unique about the education sector, about that in-person interaction.
Agree with that 100%. I mean, everything that our platform is about empowering teachers. Everything goes through the teacher. We think teachers are absolutely critical to the learning process. We still think it should be a student-centered learning process, but it should be facilitated by the teacher. And learning is collaborative. That's how the best learning is done. And we use our platform as much as possible to catalyze those types of experiences. People think because we're an ed tech company, we want to put kids in front of computers. Not the case. We want the kids to play our game a little bit, a couple of times a week, but we want is for the data that's generating and the larger platform that we have to allow teachers to sort of give every student sort of a more specific and personalized learning experience for them.
Great, thanks, Ed. So it's a lot about enhancing the learning experience and enriching it by the type of tools your company is developing. Great. Okay, I'd like to I see another question here. And by the way, to all participants who are online, again, if you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A box. That's the button in the lower right-hand part of your screen, and we'll just go through these in order. A question from a former graduate of our program, Dr. Murtada El-Haj. To all of you, all panelists, as the pandemic reshapes the whole world, how do you see the world in coming years in terms of an economic and engineering point of view, and the future for the new generation and recent graduates? That's really wide open, but an interesting question.
So I can start with this one.
Okay.
So I know that within our company, we're focused a lot on integrating subsea solutions, as I mentioned, but one of the key areas that we're looking into is in new energy and renewable energy. So we're putting a lot of attention in this area right now and partnering with some major companies within oil and gas, traditional oil and gas companies that are looking at renewable, carbon capture, hydro, wind, things like that. So we've actually formed a group which, proves our commitment in this area, which we're focusing on these new ventures and really looking towards the future for this. So I think new graduates can find, comfort and or assurance that us, the engineers out there, are looking for ways to create jobs for the future.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Okay, so I'll just go on to the next one. There are people who predicted workers would be less productive from home. Has their credibility been reevaluated in light of this pandemic?
Yeah,
Thank
who
you,
wants to take that?
Mater, for your question.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, people are always looking at situations and trying to say what will happen if this. And so there were definitely people who talked about the productivity that you'd see from home. And I go back to that idea of context. The stories that you've heard here today are about kind of the context of a pandemic, kind of people being forced out short notice. What happened? I think Ed talked about productivity going up in the short term and then taking a nosedive. And I think it really came back because of the way Ed and his company reacted. And I hope that's true in our case as well. And I think the technique has also kind of shifted around to make this all work. So I don't think there was the simple answer of just let people go home and everything would be fine. That wouldn't have worked. But when forced, when companies were saying like your whole business depends on you making this work, people very quickly figured out ways to make it work. So I don't know, the people that said this will never work are still there for just about everything that's never been tried. And I doubt anybody's really thinking about them or their credibility at this point in time. We're just moving on and looking at the next thing and the next thing. Anyway, there's my take on that one.
Darren Moore would like to ask, what opportunities do you see for an ongoing professional development due to our increased comfort with virtual learning? And how will that impact innovation in the longer term?
Sounds like you, Ed.
Yeah, it's a great question. As a company who delivers professional development services to teachers, it's big. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I like learning. I think the face-to-face, as we've talked about this, I think the face-to-face learning is ideal. When it comes to professional learning, though, I think that's a pretty decent application for virtual learning. You know, not for kids in kindergarten. That's no way for them to learn. But I think we're seeing that. I mean, there's, you know, working in the tech space, there's been some pretty hefty acquisitions and exits in the virtual learning space in the last little while. So obviously, they are seeing a massive increased demand for their services. You know, I think they'll never be higher than they were during the pandemic, but I also suspect that, you know, where they end post-pandemic will be higher than they were going into the pandemic. How will that impact innovation across the board? That's, I don't know, that's where I'm kind of, that's where the prognostication level that I'm probably not comfortable going into. But if there's greater levels of professional development, particularly, you know, in the world of computer engineering or computer science where I am, that should help impact innovation. You can, not all of the innovation is good innovation. So, you know, we'll see what the, you know, we'll see what where that gets us. But I do think, yes, yes, there's going to be more virtual learning, and it should impact the skills, if nothing else.
Yeah, I might just, I think that's all the questions typed, so I might just take a second there too. And I do agree the last half of that about innovation. I mean, even the word innovation is a challenging one to kind of say, okay, what are we talking about there? But professional development, meaning development of people who are already professionals in a virtual setting, absolutely. You know, I think everyone on our team, I think that's probably true, Ed, for you and Julia, is constantly learning things and having to learn things. I know, Greg, even before I left, we were talking about the value of micro-credentials, you know, talking about learning what one needs to know. And I feel that the challenge for the universities is you know, what are the advantages of having, you know, having that full context of a university setting, including, you know, very well educated and experienced professors. What can you do that can't be done online? And so it's maybe the opposite that I see is the challenge, I think, is for universities to find their relevance and to find a reason to have that full degree. And I know that we were working on it, and you'll continue to work on that. But for specific things that you need to know, online tools for professionals, I think, are going to continue to go crazy, and will be super valuable, and we'll all be doing them. And I think maybe universities will find a way to play more and more of a role in that, at the same time that they're adding new value to what it is to have a degree.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy and Ed. We have a couple of more questions. Let's see, let me check. Oh, no, actually, we don't. That answered those questions. So I think that concludes our questions. And normally at this part, if we were in a room together, we'd thank you and give you a round of applause. And so maybe in our own unique virtual environment, can we give the big round of applause to the speakers? Thank you all tonight. I'm sure there's a lot of noise. It's just we can't hear it. They're in their room. So I'd like to again thank you all for joining us this evening, especially Julia, Ed, and Andy for sharing, I think, a really very insightful points that about how the pandemic has affected the workplace. And I think a lot of things to think about as we go back to our organizations and try to make it a more effective, equitable work environment. So that was very enlightening. At this point, I'd like to call on Janet Bradshaw to say a few words on behalf of Paganel.
Thank you very much, Greg. And thank you to the panelists for the great presentations and later discussion. It's really so interesting to hear about how you and your companies have adapted to some of the big changes that we've all faced over the past 18 months, not 18 years. When we first enter into a disruptive event, such as the current pandemic, it's impossible for us to foresee its magnitude and how long it'll last, how our work and our everyday lives will be transformed. And while moving through it, we've all been trying and continue to try to essentially make the best of a bad situation, such as the price of lumber and the 1-year lead time on parts delivery that Andy mentioned. So in other words, the this is really hard phase that Ed spoke about. As we've heard tonight, though, at the same time, some really good things have emerged. The more flexible work schedules, more inclusive policy setting, more convenient virtual health care, and better, more intentional communication. And we hope these will continue to emerge. In terms of virtual versus in-person interactions, I can note that our board of directors met face-to-face last week, appropriately distanced, for the first time since February of 2020. And many of them had never met one another before face-to-face. They were thrilled to be together. Some of them joked at how much more interesting 3D people were. As Julia mentioned, and this applies in both our working and our personal lives, focusing on our core values and what is most important to us is always a good place to start and can help us to find our way in uncertain times. On behalf of Paganel, I sincerely thank Julia, Andy, and Ed, and the staff and faculty at Memorial who contributed to this event, bringing this event to us. We're delighted to sponsor it, and we truly value the ongoing connection that we have with the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science. Thank you as well to all the attendees who tuned in. I hope you agree that tonight's event was both interesting and thought-provoking. On behalf of Paganel, I wish you all the best. Thank you.
I believe that concludes our lecture this evening. I hope everyone enjoyed it, found it informative and interesting. I certainly did. If you have any comments or suggestions on how we can organize these going forward, by all means, please contact the faculty or Jackie Locke in particular. We're not sure how our future lectures will go, whether we should start to move back to in-person or virtual. So let us know. Tell us what you thought of it tonight. We'll certainly be mindful of those comments. So again, thank you to our speakers this evening, and I wish you all a good evening. Bye.